Portuguese is the official language of Macau, which along with Hong Kong is one of the two special administrative regions of the country. A quite curious status, so it's worth dedicating a video to it. Are you interested in learning more about Macau? Alright, then stay until the end of the video. To start, let's locate Macau on the map. Macau is a small territory of just 28 square kilometers that houses 665,000 people, making it the most densely populated region in the world. It is located next to the province of Canton. About the response is 43.496 miles southeast of Hong Kong, on the southern side of the Pearl River Delta. The nearest major city is Canton, located about. The response is 90 miles from Macau. Its legal status, as already mentioned, is that of a special administrative region within the People's Republic of China. That is, it enjoys the highest level of autonomy within the country. It has an executive representative and its own laws. The legal basis for the establishment of Macau and Hong Kong is found in Article 31 of the 1981 Chinese Constitution, so it is necessary to explain why this unique situation is allowed by the Chinese Communist Party. And for that, let's look at its history. While there is evidence that the territory of Macau was populated about 6,000 years ago, the first Chinese dynasty to effectively conquer the territory was the Qin around 220 before Christ. However, the first time Macau became an important stop on the maritime Silk Route was during the Tang dynasty, which was one of the greatest periods of cultural flourishing in Chinese history. But the milestone that determined the history of Macau occurred during the 16th century, which is when the Portuguese arrived. It's important to note that the small Portuguese country was one of the pioneers in navigation and the one who discovered the route to the Indian Ocean via the Cape of Good Hope. Thanks to this, Portugal forged itself as a maritime empire after founding a series of colonies on the coasts of Africa, India, and Southeast Asia. The next destination was China, at that time ruled by the Ming dynasty. At first, the Portuguese explorers were expelled from the coasts of Canton. It wouldn't be until 1557 that the Chinese granted Portugal the right to establish a settlement in Macau in exchange for paying tribute to Beijing and committing to support the fight against piracy in the area. Thus, the Portuguese began to progressively immigrate to Macau, coming from their colonies in Malacca, in present-day Malaysia, and almost all of them married to Malay wives. By 1573, the Portuguese population had already reached 1,000. Thus, centuries pass and Macau prospers as a meeting point for traders from China, Japan, India, and Europe. However, by the 18th century, Portugal begins to decline as a global maritime power. And in the 19th century, Macau is displaced by Hong Kong as the main port of the region, once the territory was ceded to the British, the then world's leading power. Speaking of the 19th century during which the Qing dynasty reigned, this period is considered in Chinese history as the century of humiliation. In it, the Chinese empire enters a period of decline and is forced by Japan and the Western powers to sign a series of unequal treaties. Portugal takes advantage of this situation to sign the Treaty of Beijing in 1887, which was drafted in Portuguese and Mandarin Chinese. The Portuguese interpretation was that sovereignty over Macau was perpetually handed over to Portugal, while according to the Chinese, in their language only administrative rights were transferred. Despite all this, the Chinese community and the Portuguese colony continued to grow to the point of surpassing the Portuguese, so the territory maintained a strong Chinese cultural influence. Already in the 20th century, it is noteworthy that during World War II, Macau became an important refuge for all those who wanted to flee from the war, as Portugal remained neutral at all times. From the 1950s, Macau's economy was revitalized with the introduction of the gaming industry, which was banned in communist China, attracting many tourists. Macau's economy was revitalized with the introduction of the gaming industry, which was banned in communist China, attracting many tourists. In 1974, the Carnation Revolution broke out in Portugal, which meant the end of the dictatorial period known as Estado Novo, and therefore a change in the country's colonial policy. Thus, in 1987, both signed the Sino-Portuguese Joint Declaration, in which they agreed that Macau would be returned to China in In 1987, both signed the Sino-Portuguese Joint Declaration, in which they agreed that Macau would be returned to China in 1999 under the status of Special Administrative Region, just like Hong Kong. Under the status of Special Administrative Region, just like Hong Kong. This status must be respected at least until 2049, 50 years after the transfer. Since then, Macau combines elements of Portuguese and Chinese cultures, maintaining a high degree of autonomy. Today, Macau is known as the Las Vegas of Asia, although it actually collects more from gambling than the famous American city. This has contributed to Macau being one of the richest economies in the world in terms of gross domestic product per capita, and also having the second highest life expectancy in the world, according to the Central Intelligence Agency World Factbook. In 2005, the historic center of Macau, where you still see traffic signs in Cantonese and Portuguese, was designated as a World Heritage Site by United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. An amazing place is the Macao Tower, which at the response is 370 yards, is the 8th tallest building in the world, from where you can see a panoramic view of the city, and from where you can bungee jump if you have the courage to do it. As you can see, Macau is a true fusion of Chinese and Portuguese cultures, a territory that shines for its human development but runs the same risk as Hong Kong, something that could perhaps trigger a similar problem given the same status. So we will have to wait until 2049 to see what happens. Do you think that at the end of this period the Macanese will maintain their autonomy? Don't forget to leave your comment and subscribe to the channel.